What happens when a royal prince meets his match in one of television's most fearless interviewers? You won't believe what unfolds when Prince Harry sits down with Savannah Guthrie, thinking he can control the narrative, only to find himself facing questions that cut deeper than any royal protocol could prepare him for. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This is a masterclass in journalistic persistence meeting royal entitlement, and the explosion that follows will leave you speechless. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two powerhouses collide in what becomes one of the most dramatic exits in television history. The studio lights were blazing hot as Prince Harry settled into the familiar cream-colored chair across from Savannah Guthrie, his confident smile masking what would soon become one of the most contentious interviews in recent memory. The Duke of Sussex had arrived with his usual entourage of handlers and PR representatives, all strategically positioned just off camera, ready to swoop in at the first sign of trouble. Little did they know, trouble was already brewing behind Savannah's professional demeanor. From the moment the cameras started rolling, there was an unmistakable tension crackling through the air. Harry's body language spoke volumes, shoulders slightly hunched forward, hands clasped tightly together, that practiced royal smile that never quite reached his eyes. He'd clearly come prepared with his usual talking points about mental health advocacy and his charitable work, expecting the softball treatment he'd grown accustomed to from other American media outlets. But Savannah Guthrie wasn't just any interviewer. She'd built her reputation on asking the questions others wouldn't dare, and tonight she had her sights set on the inconsistencies that had been piling up in Harry's public statements for months. The opening pleasantries lasted exactly 37 seconds before she dropped the first bombshell. "Prince Harry, you've spoken extensively about wanting privacy for your family, yet you've signed multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix and Spotify, written a tell-all memoir, and given numerous interviews. How do you reconcile this apparent contradiction?" Her voice was steady, professional, but there was steel underneath that made Harry's PR team shift uncomfortably in their seats. Harry's practiced smile flickered for just a moment. "Well, Savannah, I think there's a difference between privacy and having your story told accurately. We've been subjected to so much misinformation that it became necessary to set the record straight." His voice carried that familiar tone of wounded nobility that had worked so well in previous interviews. "Set the record straight," Savannah repeated, leaning forward slightly. "That's interesting phrasing. Because in your book, you made some very serious allegations about your family members. You claimed your brother physically attacked you, suggested your stepmother leaked stories about you to the press, and painted a picture of a family that seems almost cartoonishly villainous. Don't you think that's exactly the kind of misinformation you say you're fighting against?" The question hit like a physical blow. Harry's handlers immediately began making subtle gestures from the sidelines, clearly hoping to redirect the conversation, but Savannah wasn't finished. She'd done her homework, and every carefully crafted talking point Harry had prepared was about to be systematically dismantled. "I think you're mischaracterizing what I wrote," Harry said, his voice taking on a defensive edge. "Everything in that book was my truth, my lived experience. I'm not going to apologize for sharing my story." "Your truth," Savannah echoed, and there was something in her tone that made the entire studio hold its breath. "But isn't truth supposed to be objective? When you describe private conversations with family members who can't respond publicly, when you share intimate details about arguments and personal moments, isn't that exactly the kind of invasive coverage you say drove you away from royal life?" Harry's composure was starting to crack. The smooth media training that had carried him through dozens of interviews was beginning to fail him. "That's completely different. When the tabloids do it, they're making things up. When I do it, I'm telling the truth about what actually happened." "So the difference is that when you do it, it's justified?" Savannah's follow-up was lightning quick, not giving him a moment to regroup. "You've criticized the British press for their intrusion into your private life, but then you voluntarily shared details about your brother's bedroom, your father's financial arrangements, and private conversations with your grandmother. How is that not the same kind of invasion?" The prince's face was beginning to flush red, a sure sign that the carefully constructed facade was crumbling. His PR team was practically vibrating with anxiety, knowing they were watching their client walk into a trap of his own making. But Harry, in his arrogance, pressed forward. "You're twisting my words," he snapped, the royal composure slipping away entirely. "The press has been attacking my family for years. My wife has been subjected to racist coverage that nearly drove her to suicide. We had to protect ourselves." Savannah didn't miss a beat. "Your wife has indeed faced unfair coverage, and I think most people sympathize with that. But Prince Harry, you've also made millions of dollars from sharing these family secrets. Netflix reportedly paid you over $100 million. Spotify paid you millions more. Your book Advance was estimated at $20 million. At what point does protecting your family become profiting from their private moments?" The question hung in the air like a sword of Damocles. Harry's mouth opened and closed several times, clearly searching for an answer that wouldn't further expose the hypocrisy at the heart of his media strategy. His handlers were now making increasingly desperate gestures, but Savannah wasn't about to let him off the hook. "Furthermore," she continued, pressing her advantage, "you've positioned yourself as someone who champions mental health awareness. Yet you've publicly discussed your family members' private struggles and personal issues without their consent. Your brother's alleged anger issues, your father's relationship with Camilla, your stepmother's private conversations. How does exposing people's personal struggles align with mental health advocacy?" Harry was visibly struggling now, his hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles had gone white. The confident prince who had walked onto the set had been replaced by a man who looked cornered, desperate, and increasingly angry. "You're taking everything out of context," he said through gritted teeth. "The royal family has resources. They have platforms. They can defend themselves if they choose to." "Can they, though?" Savannah shot back immediately. "Because royal protocol prevents them from engaging in public disputes. They literally can't respond to your allegations without breaking centuries of tradition. Isn't that exactly what you're counting on? That they'll stay silent while you profit from telling your side of the story?" The studio had gone dead quiet except for the hum of the cameras and the barely audible whispers of Harry's increasingly frantic PR team. Even the crew members, who had seen their share of contentious interviews, were watching with rapt attention as one of the world's most protected public figures found himself completely exposed. Harry's response, when it finally came, was barely controlled fury wrapped in wounded entitlement. "I never asked to be born into that family. I never asked for any of this. And now you're sitting here, attacking me for trying to build a life for my wife and children away from all that toxicity." But Savannah wasn't backing down. If anything, his defensive anger only seemed to fuel her determination to get to the truth. "No one's attacking you, Prince Harry. I'm asking you to explain the contradictions in your own actions. You can't simultaneously claim to want privacy while selling your family's private moments to the highest bidder. You can't position yourself as a victim while profiting from victimizing others." The confrontation was reaching a boiling point, and everyone in the studio could feel it. Harry's face had gone from flushed red to an alarming shade of purple, his breathing visible and labored. His carefully cultivated image as the spare who had found his voice was crumbling in real time, revealing something much uglier underneath. What happened next would shock everyone in that studio and set the stage for an even more explosive confrontation that was about to unfold. Harry suddenly leaned back in his chair, letting out a bitter laugh that echoed through the silent studio. "You know what, Savannah? This is exactly why we left. This is exactly the kind of gotcha journalism that drove us out of the UK. I came here thinking American media would be different, but you're just like all the rest." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge, but Savannah didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, her expression remaining perfectly composed. "Prince Harry, asking you to explain your own contradictory statements isn't gotcha journalism. It's journalism. Period." "Contradictory statements?" Harry's voice was rising now, all pretense of royal decorum abandoned. "Everything I've said has been consistent. My family threw us under the bus, the press crucified my wife, and we had to fight back the only way we could. By becoming exactly what you claim to hate? Savannah's response was ice cold and surgical in its precision. You've spent years criticizing the tabloids for profiting off royal family drama, and then you turned around and did exactly the same thing. The only difference is you cut out the middleman. Harry's PR handler, a sharp-faced woman in her 50s, was now frantically gesturing from behind the cameras, making slashing motions across her throat. But Harry was too far gone to notice, too caught up in his own indignation to realize he was digging his own grave with every word. "That's not the same thing at all," he protested, his voice cracking with emotion. "When the tabloids do it, they're lying. When I do it, I'm telling my truth about what really happened behind closed doors." "Your truth," Savannah repeated, and there was something almost pitying in her voice now. "But Prince Harry, truth isn't subjective. Either your brother pushed you into a dog bowl or he didn't. Either your father cut you off financially or he didn't. Either your stepmother planted stories about you or she didn't. You can't just slap the word truth onto your version of events and expect everyone to accept it without question." The prince was visibly shaking now, his hands trembling as he gripped the arms of his chair. "You weren't there. You don't know what it was like growing up in that family, being the spare, watching them protect my brother while throwing me to the wolves." "You're right. I wasn't there," Savannah acknowledged. "But neither were the millions of people who bought your book, who watched your Netflix series, who listened to your podcasts. Yet you've asked them to take your word for everything, to accept your characterization of private family moments as gospel truth. Don't you think they deserve to hear from the other side?" "The other side?" Harry's laugh was harsh and bitter. "The other side has had 70 years to tell their story. They've had the entire British establishment protecting them, propping them up, covering for their mistakes. Meanwhile, my wife and I were left to fend for ourselves." Savannah leaned forward, her eyes never leaving Harry's face. "But that's not entirely accurate, is it? Your family did defend Meghan when she was first criticized. Your grandmother issued statements supporting her. Your father walked her down the aisle when her own father couldn't be there. The institution may have failed you in some ways, but to paint them as universally villainous, doesn't that seem a bit convenient for your narrative?" Harry's face contorted with rage. "Convenient? You think any of this has been convenient? You think watching my wife suffer, watching her contemplate suicide, watching the press tear apart everything we tried to build, you think that was convenient?" "I think profiting from that suffering has been very convenient," Savannah replied without missing a beat. "Your wife's mental health struggles are serious and deserve sympathy, but you've monetized them. You've turned her pain into content for your various media deals. How is that different from what you accused the tabloids of doing?" The question hit like a physical blow. Harry's mouth fell open, his face cycling through a series of expressions: shock, rage, something that might have been shame, and then back to fury. "How dare you?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "How dare you suggest that we're exploiting Meghan's suffering?" "I'm not suggesting it," Savannah said calmly. "I'm stating it as fact. You've discussed her suicidal thoughts in interviews, in your book, in your Netflix series. You've made them a central part of your public narrative. Every time you bring up her mental health struggles, you're using her pain to justify your actions and generate sympathy for your cause." Harry was on his feet now, pacing behind his chair like a caged animal. His security detail, who had been stationed near the studio entrance, were beginning to shift nervously, clearly unsure whether they should intervene. The prince's face was a mask of barely controlled fury, his carefully constructed public image crumbling in real time. "You're twisting everything," he snarled, pointing an accusatory finger at Savannah. "You're taking our pain, our struggle, and turning it into some kind of calculated manipulation. That's sick. That's exactly the kind of toxic behavior that drove us away." "Then why do you keep coming back?" Savannah's question was delivered with devastating simplicity. "If American media is just as bad as British media, if everyone's out to get you, if every interview is an attack, why do you keep doing them? Why do you keep putting yourself in these situations?" Harry froze mid-pace, caught completely off guard by the question. His mouth opened and closed several times, clearly searching for an answer that wouldn't further expose his hypocrisy. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, filled only by the hum of the cameras and the barely audible whispers of his increasingly frantic handlers. "Because," he finally said, his voice strained and desperate, "because if we don't tell our story, nobody will. If we don't fight back, they'll just keep lying about us, keep destroying our reputation, keep making us out to be the villains." "But whose reputation are you really protecting here?" Savannah asked, her voice gentle but relentless. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've done more damage to your own reputation than any tabloid ever could. You've gone from being the charming spare, the people's prince, the war hero, to being seen as bitter, vengeful, and opportunistic. Was that really worth the money?" The studio had gone dead silent. Even the camera operators seemed to be holding their breath, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Harry's handlers had given up their frantic gesturing and were now huddled together in what appeared to be an emergency consultation, clearly realizing that their client was beyond saving. Harry himself looked like a man who had just been slapped awake from a pleasant dream. The fury was still there, burning in his eyes, but it was mixed now with something else, a dawning realization that he had walked into a trap entirely of his own making. "The money," he repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. "You think this is about money? Isn't it?" Savannah shot back immediately. "You left the royal family claiming you wanted a private life, and then you signed deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars to make that private life as public as possible. You've commodified your family relationships, your marriage, your mental health struggles, your military service. Everything that should be sacred has become content for your various platforms." Harry's response, when it came, was a roar of pure rage that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. "Enough!" The word echoed through the studio like a gunshot, causing several crew members to actually jump. "I don't have to sit here and listen to this character assassination." But Savannah wasn't intimidated. If anything, his outburst seemed to energize her, confirming that she had struck a nerve. "Character? Assassination? I'm asking you to explain your own actions using your own words. If that feels like an assassination, maybe the problem isn't with the questions." The confrontation had reached a point of no return, and everyone in that studio knew it. Harry was standing behind his chair now, his hands gripping the back of it so tightly that his knuckles had gone white. His breathing was labored, his face flushed with rage, and his eyes held a wild look that his security team clearly recognized as dangerous. What happened next would transform this heated exchange into television history. Harry suddenly slammed his fist down on the back of his chair with such force that the entire piece of furniture shuddered. The sound reverberated through the studio like a thunderclap, causing every person present to freeze in stunned silence. "You want to know the truth, Savannah? The real truth?" His voice was raw, stripped of all pretense, all media training, all royal protocol. "Fine, I'll give you the truth." Savannah remained perfectly still, her professional composure intact despite the volatile energy radiating from the prince. She sensed that whatever came next would either vindicate her approach or destroy her career, but she wasn't about to back down now. "I'm listening. The truth is that I never wanted any of this," Harry continued, his voice cracking with emotion. "I never wanted to write that book. I never wanted to do the Netflix series. I never wanted to sit in studios like this one, rehashing the worst moments of my life for entertainment, but they gave me no choice." "They?" Savannah's voice was barely above a whisper, drawing him deeper into his confession. "My family," Harry exploded, spittle flying from his lips. "They cut us off completely. No security, no financial support, no nothing. They left us hanging out to dry while the entire world was watching. What were we supposed to do? Live in poverty? Let our children grow up without protection? We had to monetize our story because it was the only asset we had left." The admission hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Harry's PR team looked absolutely horrified, realizing that their client had just confessed to exactly what Savannah had been accusing him of all along. The prince himself seemed momentarily stunned by his own words, as if he couldn't quite believe what had just come out of his mouth. Savannah pounced immediately. "So you're admitting that this was always about money? That your crusade for truth was actually just a business venture? It wasn't supposed to be, Harry screamed, his voice breaking completely. We just wanted to be left alone. We wanted to live quietly in California and raise our children away from all the madness, but they wouldn't let us go peacefully. They had to make an example of us, had to show the world what happens when you defy the institution. But, Prince Harry, Savannah said, her voice deadly calm in contrast to his hysteria, you didn't just leave quietly. You gave that interview with Oprah before you'd even settled into your new life. You started making demands and accusations almost immediately. How is that trying to live quietly? Harry's face went through a series of rapid transformations: confusion, realization, and then pure, unadulterated rage. That interview was supposed to set the record straight so we could move on with our lives, but you people wouldn't let it go. The press kept coming after us, kept asking questions, kept demanding explanations. So we gave you what you wanted: more content, more revelations, more drama. We? Savannah leaned forward, sensing blood in the water. Or you? Because it seems like every major decision about your media strategy has been yours. Your wife appears in these projects, but she's not the one shopping book deals, or signing Netflix contracts, or scheduling podcast interviews. This crusade belongs to you, doesn't it? The question hit Harry like a physical blow. His mouth fell open, and for a moment he looked genuinely shocked, as if the possibility had never occurred to him. His handlers were now making desperate cutting motions with their hands, clearly recognizing that the interview had spiraled completely out of control. Meghan supports everything I do, Harry said weakly, but even he seemed to realize how pathetic it sounded. I'm sure she does, Savannah replied, her tone almost gentle now. But supporting your decisions isn't the same as making them. You've positioned her as an equal partner in this media campaign, but everything points to you as the driving force. You're the one with the family secrets to sell. You're the one with the insider knowledge that makes these projects valuable. She's just along for the ride, isn't she? Harry's response was a sound somewhere between a growl and a sob. You don't understand anything. You don't understand what it's like to watch the person you love being destroyed by people who are supposed to protect you. You don't understand what it's like to feel completely powerless while your family throws you to the wolves. Maybe I don't, Savannah acknowledged, but I understand hypocrisy when I see it. You've spent years criticizing your family for their treatment of you, but you've done exactly the same thing to them. You've exposed their private moments, shared their personal struggles, and profited from their pain. The only difference is that they can't fight back. They don't deserve to fight back, Harry roared, completely losing what little composure he had left. They had every chance to support us, to protect us, to treat us with basic human decency. Instead, they chose to protect the institution over their own family. They chose tradition over love. They chose silence over justice. Justice? Savannah's voice was sharp as a blade. You think this is justice? Selling your family's secrets to the highest bidder? Making millions off your grandmother's final years? Exposing private conversations with your dying grandfather? What kind of justice is that? The question seemed to physically stagger Harry. He took several steps backward, his face cycling through a series of expressions: rage, confusion, something that might have been shame, and then back to fury. Everything I did was in response to what they did to us first. Every revelation, every interview, every project, it was all self-defense. Self-defense that made you rich, Savannah observed coldly. Very convenient. Stop saying that, Harry screamed, his voice echoing through the studio. Stop making this about money. This was never about money. Then give it back, Savannah said simply. The two words hit the studio like a bomb. Harry froze completely, his mouth hanging open, his eyes wide with shock. Even his security team seemed stunned by the simplicity and devastating effectiveness of the challenge. What? Harry whispered. Give it back, Savannah repeated, her voice perfectly calm and reasonable. If this was never about money, if this was all just self-defense and truth-telling and protecting your family, give back the Netflix money. Return the book advance. Donate the Spotify earnings to charity. Put your money where your mouth is. Harry's face went through another series of rapid changes, finally settling on a look of pure hatred that was so intense it made several crew members take an involuntary step backward. "You're out of your mind," he hissed through clenched teeth. "Am I?" Savannah asked. "Because it seems like a perfectly reasonable request. If money was never the motivation, then removing money from the equation shouldn't be a problem. Unless, of course, money was always the point." The silence that followed was deafening. Harry stood there, swaying slightly, his breathing labored and his eyes wild. His entire worldview, his carefully constructed narrative about justice and truth and family protection, had just been reduced to its core element, greed. And everyone in that studio knew it. "I don't have to listen to this," Harry said finally, his voice barely audible. "I don't have to sit here and be lectured by someone who has no idea what I've been through." "You're right," Savannah agreed. "You don't have to listen to this. But you chose to come here. You chose to make these deals. You chose to tell these stories. And you chose to profit from your family's pain. Those were all your decisions, Prince Harry. Own them." Harry stared at her for a long moment, his face a mask of barely controlled rage and something that might have been broken pride. Then, without warning, he ripped off his microphone and threw it on the floor with such force that it shattered into pieces. "This interview is over," he declared, his voice shaking with fury. "I'm done with your gotcha questions and your character assassination and your complete lack of understanding about what real family loyalty means." But Savannah wasn't finished. As Harry turned to storm off the set, she delivered one final devastating blow. "Real family loyalty doesn't come with a price tag, Prince Harry. And it doesn't get sold to the highest bidder." Harry whirled around, his face contorted with rage. "How dare you lecture me about family loyalty when you've spent the last hour trying to destroy me on national television?" "I didn't destroy you," Savannah replied calmly. "You destroyed yourself. I just asked you to explain your own actions." Harry opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He stood there for a moment, trembling with fury and humiliation, before turning on his heel and storming toward the studio exit. His security team scrambled to follow him, while his PR handlers gathered up their materials in obvious panic. "Prince Harry," Savannah called after him, "don't you think your audience deserves an explanation?" Harry stopped at the studio door and turned back one final time. "My audience already knows the truth," he said, his voice heavy with defeated arrogance. "They don't need your permission to believe it." "Truth has a way of revealing itself," Savannah replied, "usually when people least expect it." And with that, Prince Harry pushed through the studio doors and disappeared into the hallway, leaving behind a stunned crew, a shattered microphone, and the wreckage of his carefully constructed public image. The cameras kept rolling for several more seconds, capturing Savannah's composed expression and the empty chair where the prince had been sitting just moments before. As the studio lights dimmed and the crew began to process what they had just witnessed, one thing was absolutely clear. This wasn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This was the moment when one of the world's most protected public figures had been completely and utterly exposed, and the mask had finally slipped away to reveal the bitter, entitled, and ultimately hollow man underneath. The confrontation was over, but its impact would reverberate through the media landscape for years to come.